Hey, real quick before the story starts, if you like lit reading, I've got something new you might enjoy. It's called New Tales Told, original short stories. Same voice, same vibe. Just search for New Tales Told right here in this podcast app. And just so you're not surprised, there may be some ads before the story. Sorry, we have to pay the bills.
While every other channel is fighting for your customers' attention, podcasts are where they've already given it. No one accidentally listens to a podcast for 45 minutes. They choose to be here. They trust the voice in their ears, and when that voice talks about your brand, it doesn't sound like advertising. It sounds like a recommendation from a friend. Acast gives you that trust at scale. Digital precision, host-read authenticity, and performance data that proves it worked. Don't fight for attention. Buy it with Acast. Learn more by visiting acast.com/advertise.
Hi, I'm Don McDonald. It is the late summer of 1861. Fort Sumter has fallen. Bull Run has been lost. President Lincoln has called for 500,000 more men for 3 years of service, and a young Indianapolis law clerk with a father who had been warning him about his smart mouth for 2 decades is about to do a kindness for a widow. That good deed is going to cost him more than he expects. This is an original story from the world of my first novel, The Line Uncrossed, available Memorial Day weekend 2026 at Amazon and BN.com. I hope you enjoy The Pen by me. My father wanted me to be a serious man. From the start, a difficult assignment because I was not built for it. I was built to banter. I was built for the small pleasure of making a comment that elicited laughs, the smaller pleasure of drawing a suppressed chuckle from my mother in church, and the smallest and most dangerous pleasure of making my father stifle one against his will. He resented being made to laugh. He believed that laughter was a thing that ought to be earned, like money, and that I scattered it the way other young men scattered coins on a counter, without regard for what it cost. "One of these days, Henry," he would say, "that mouth is going to walk you somewhere I can't come and get you." And I would say something back. I always said something back. That was the whole problem, in a way. The thing he was warning me about was the same thing he was, at that very moment, observing in operation. My father was a hardware merchant. He sold nails and stove parts and links of cord and the kinds of small iron things that hold a country together at the seams. His store was on Washington Street in Indianapolis, 3 blocks from the statehouse, and he had built it from a single counter in 1843 to a respectable concern with 2 clerks and a delivery cart, and he intended for me to inherit it. To prepare me for this inheritance, 2 years before the war, he placed me in the law office of Mr. Calvin Briggs, attorney, where I was to learn about contracts, accounts, liens, leases, and the general legal architecture of buying and selling. The fee for this apprenticeship was paid by my father directly, which is to say I was being trained, at his expense, for a life I had no intention of leading. I did not tell him this. You did not tell my father things like this. You waited, and you copied your contracts, and you nodded at the appropriate intervals, and you tried not to make jokes about Mr. Briggs in front of your father, who liked Mr. Briggs, and who would not have understood why a man who copied other men's sentences for a living might develop opinions about which of those sentences were any good. Mr. Briggs' sentences were not any good. This is a small thing to know about a man, but it was, I felt, a thing worth noticing. The war began on a Friday in April. By late summer of that year, a Tuesday, I think, or possibly a Wednesday, Mr. Briggs came back from lunch and told us with great seriousness that Mr. Lincoln had issued a second call for volunteers, this time for 500,000 men, this time for 3 years of service or the duration of the war, whichever came first. The first battle had been fought at a place called Bull Run in Virginia the previous month, and the country had lost it badly. The war was, Mr. Briggs said, going to be longer than anyone had expected. Every man in the office should consider his duty. There were 3 of us in the office. Mr. Briggs was 61. Old Pettigrew, the senior clerk, had a wooden leg from a sawmill accident in 1849. That left me. I considered my duty. I considered it for about 2 weeks. The considering involved a great deal of walking past the recruiting tables that had sprung up around the statehouse, where men in clean new uniforms shouted things at passers-by that would have embarrassed them 6 months earlier. I noticed, with the scribe's ear I had developed in 2 years of copying Mr. Briggs, that the recruiters were using the same 6 adjectives in different orders. Glorious, sacred, imperiled, resolute, manly, free. I made a small sport of counting them. By the end of the second week, I could predict which one was coming next, and I was right more often than not. I did not enlist. I had, it must be said, no intention of enlisting. I had political opinions of the kind a young man develops in a city where men make speeches every Tuesday, but my opinions did not extend to dying. I was against slavery, and I was for the Union, and I was also very much in favor of remaining alive in Indianapolis. These positions seemed to me consistent. I have since revised this view. What got me into trouble was a kindness. There was a boy in our neighborhood named Tobias Hatch. He had turned 18 that July, and turning 18 had done something to him. The way it does to certain boys, it had made the whole world feel suddenly within reach, and the whole world that summer was the war. He was the only son of the widow Hatch, who took in sewing and who had been kind to my mother during a long illness the year before. Tobias had announced, with the seriousness only 18-year-olds can muster, that he was going to claim 21 and enlist in the 6th Indiana, and nothing, his mother said, could prevent him. His mother had said many things. None of them had prevented him. The trouble with Tobias was that he could pass. He was tall for his age, and he had begun, that winter, to develop the kind of jaw that a recruiter looking for warm bodies would recognize and accept. No certificate was checked. There was no one in the line who would know him. He had only to walk up to the table and say a number, and the number would be written down, and the war would have him. She came to our house on a Wednesday evening. She sat in our parlor, and she cried, and she said to my mother that her boy was going to die in a field somewhere because no one had stopped him, and my mother looked at me across the room with the particular look she had been giving me since I was 9 years old, which was a look that meant, "Henry, here is a thing you can fix." "I'll go talk to him," I said. My father, who had come into the parlor at the wrong moment, said, "You'll talk him out of it?" "I'll talk him out of it." "You?" "Me?" My father considered this. He considered it the way he considered everything, which was with the suspicion of a man who had spent 30 years in retail and had learned that most propositions on examination contained a hidden defect. But he could find no defect in this one. His son was going to do a kindness for a widow. The kindness involved talking, which was a thing his son was, regrettably, good at. He nodded once, which was as close as my father came to approval, and he went back to his ledger. I found Tobias the next morning at the recruiting table on the south side of the statehouse. He was standing in line, which is the first thing you should know. The second thing is that he was wearing the boots his mother had bought him for his birthday, which had taken her 3 months of saved sewing money to afford, and which he had laced up that morning with the particular gravity of a young man who knew, at some level, that he was about to break her heart and was determined to do it in good footwear. I joined him in line. I did this because pulling him out of line in front of the recruiter would have humiliated him. I had been 18 once, and I remembered that being humiliated at 18 was worse than being shot at. I figured I would talk to him as we waited, and reason with him, and by the time we reached the table, he would be ready to walk away under his own steam. That was my first mistake. The line moved faster than I had calculated. I had got him as far as agreeing to think about it, which is the furthest an 18-year-old will ever go on the question of his own immortality, when we arrived at the recruiter's table. The recruiter was a sergeant named Boyle, a red-faced, red-haired man with a very large mustache and the look of a man who had been shouting all morning and was now trying not to shout. He looked at Tobias. He looked at me. He looked at the way Tobias was standing slightly behind me, which was a piece of unconscious geometry that told the sergeant most of what he needed to know. "So, you with him?" he said. "In a manner of speaking." "What manner is that?" "The manner," I said, "of a man who has been sent here by this boy's mother to retrieve him before he commits an act of patriotic foolishness." Sergeant Boyle laughed. He had not expected to laugh. He had been having, I gathered, a long morning of earnest young men, and the appearance of a sarcastic one was, to him, a small mercy. He laughed, and Tobias looked at me with the betrayed expression of an 18-year-old whose hero has just become a comedian, and the line behind us shifted uncomfortably. "Well," Sergeant Boyle said, "that's the most honest thing anybody said to me today. What's your name, son?" "Henry Pollard." "Age?" 21. He wrote it down. He wrote it down on the same page where Tobias's name would have gone, and he turned the page toward me, and he held out a pen. The pen was a steel nib-dip pen, and the inkwell was beside it, and the form had a line at the bottom waiting for a name. I should, at this moment, have explained the misunderstanding. I should have set the pen down and said I had given my name in jest, and I had no business at the table. Sergeant Boyle was smiling at me. The line behind me was watching. The pen was in his hand, and then it was in mine, and I had not, in any conscious way, decided to take it. I dipped it. I signed. Sergeant Boyle pulled the form back, blew on it, and slid it into a stack of other forms, where it became, in the space of one slow breath, part of something larger than itself. This was the second mistake. Not signing the form. Taking the pen. The signing was just the consequence of the taking. The taking was the thing I had done without noticing I was doing it, the way a man steps off a curb without looking and only realizes mid-step that the curb is higher than he thought. "Sergeant," I said, "there's been a small misunderstanding." "Oh?" "I didn't come here to enlist. I came here for the boy. I think I would like to unsign." Sergeant Boyle looked at me. He had been smiling. He was not now smiling. The change in his face was not unkind. It was the change of a man who had been having a small, pleasant moment and had been required by the duty of his office to put the moment down and pick up something heavier. "Son," he said, "the form is the form. You've signed it. I've witnessed it. The next thing that happens is the doctor looks at your chest. The thing after that is the oath. The Army doesn't unsign men, Mr. Pollard. The Army takes them." "But I didn't mean it." "Meanin'," he said gently, "is a thing before you sign." There was silence. The silence of a young man who understands, for the first time, that the world he had been moving through as a comedian was not a comedy. It was a place with rules, and the rules had been written by men who had thought about young men like me and who had decided, in their patient and federal way, that young men like me would not be permitted to talk their way out of what their mouths had talked them into. Sergeant Boyle, sensing perhaps that I was running through the options in the privacy of my head, leaned forward on his elbows in the manner of a man making conversation. "The penalty for desertion in time of war," he said pleasantly, the way another man might mention the price of corn, "is death by firing squad, although in practice we tend to settle for hard labor and the loss of pay. Just so you know what you're considering, Mr. Pollard. Some young men consider it. I find it kinder to be plain about the arithmetic." "I appreciate the plainness, Sergeant." "I thought you might." "What's your father do?" Sergeant Boyle said after a moment. He said it kindly. He said it in the way a man might offer a chair after explaining where the exits weren't. He's a hardware merchant.
Good man?
The best.
He'll be proud then.
I knew when he said it that he did not believe it. I knew that he had said it because it was the thing a sergeant said to a young man who had just understood what had happened to him, and that the saying of it was its own small kindness, and that I was expected to receive the kindness without making a scene. I received it. I am, when it matters, my father's son. I nodded. I said, because I am also the man I am, and because the mouth was, even then, the only tool I had, he might surprise us both. It got a laugh, a small one this time, from Sergeant Boyle and one or two men in the line. The laugh was not the door. The door had already closed. The laugh was just the sound of a room he could no longer leave. Tobias did not enlist. Sergeant Boyle, having got his joke and his signature, became a different man. He looked at Tobias for a long moment, taking him in the way a man takes in a horse he is not going to buy. He saw the new boots. He saw the way the boy was holding himself half a step behind me, hoping not to be noticed, and hoping to be noticed in equal measure. He saw, I suspect, the lie before the boy had spoken it.
Age?
He said. Tobias swallowed. 21? He said. Sergeant Boyle nodded slowly. He did not write it down. He looked at the boy for a long beat, and the beat was the longest part of the morning, and at the end of it he said, with a tenderness that surprised me, "Son, I've got more men than I can use today. Come back next month." It was a lie. He had told it the way certain lies are told, which is as a gift. And Tobias took it because he was 18 and not yet capable of refusing a man in uniform who was telling him to go home. There was a small mercy in the way the sergeant arranged it. He did not call the boy a liar. He let him keep the dignity of the number. He simply, quietly, declined to have him. Tobias went home. I watched him go. He was crying without knowing why, the way young men cry when their lives have been saved by a kindness they did not request. And I thought, well, at least the kindness worked. I thought this even as I stood at the table holding a printed form with my name on it. I thought this even as Sergeant Boyle pointed me toward the next tent, where a corporal would measure my height, and a doctor would listen to my chest, and a clerk would ask me if I had any infirmities I wished to declare. I declared none. I had a sense, by then, that declaring infirmities would be a third mistake compounded on the first two. And I had begun, for the first time in my life, to consider the possibility that my mouth had walked me somewhere from which my mouth alone was not going to retrieve me. The walk home was the longest walk of my life to that point, although it would not, as it turned out, hold the record for very long. I thought, the entire way, about how I was going to tell my father. I composed speeches. I rejected speeches. I considered desertion, briefly, the way Sergeant Boyle had warned me a young man might, and rejected that too on the arithmetic. Because the arithmetic, when you laid it out the way the sergeant had, was not in my favor. My mother was in the kitchen. She turned when I came in. She looked at my face, and her own face changed, and she said, "Henry," in the voice she had used when I was 7 and had broken something I was not supposed to have been holding. "I've done a thing," I said. She put her hand to her mouth, and she made a small sound, and she wept the way my mother wept, which was without noise and without complaint, the way a woman weeps when she has been preparing for a piece of news without knowing which piece it would be. She wept for less than a minute. Then she sat down at the table and folded her hands on the wood and looked at me. She had been my mother for over 20 years, and the things I did had a recognizable signature. My father came home from the store at 6. I told him at the table, because I've always been a coward about the important things, and I needed the presence of food and silverware and my mother to soften the moment. I told him plainly. I told him I had gone to retrieve Tobias and had returned enlisted. I told him about Sergeant Boyle and the line and the joke and the form. My father did not say anything for a long time. He looked at his plate. He looked at my mother. He looked, finally, at me. "Henry," He said. Yes, sir.
Do you remember what I told you about your mouth?
Yes, sir.
Do you remember it precisely?
Yes, sir. He nodded. He cut a piece of his meat. He chewed it. He swallowed it. He set down his fork.
Well,
he said,
here we are.
That was all he said. He did not yell. He did not weep. He did not lecture. He ate the rest of his meal in silence, and he stood up, and he went into his study, and he closed the door, and he did not come out again that night. My mother and I cleared the table. She did not weep either. She had used up her weeping at the words, "I've done a thing," and she was, I came to understand later, conserving the rest of it for when I was gone and could not see it. I mustered in 3 weeks later. The 6th Indiana, the 3-year regiment raised from the men of the 3-month one, left for Louisville on the 20th of September, and the city sent us off through its streets with a band and a small crowd because the city had not yet learned what a column of men looked like coming back. The going out was still, at the time, a thing people gathered to see. My father came to the station. I had not expected him. He stood at the platform with my mother, and he did not say anything. And I did not know how to say anything to him. The train hissed, and the sergeant shouted, and the band played a song I have since forgotten. At the last moment, just before I climbed up, he put his hand on my shoulder. He had not put his hand on my shoulder since I was a child. The hand was heavier than I remembered.
Henry?
He said. Yes, sir? He looked at me. He looked at me for what felt like a long time, although it could not have been long because the train was leaving. His mouth worked. He was, I realized with a small shock, trying to make a joke. He was trying to send me off with a joke because he had finally understood after 20 years that jokes were the language his son spoke, and he was trying at the last possible moment to speak it. He could not find the joke. He was not built for it. The joke would not come. Come back, he said instead. That was all. Come back. 2 words from a man who did not waste them. I climbed onto the train, and I waved to my mother, and I did not look at my father again, because I was afraid that if I looked at him I would do something I could not undo, like get off the train, or weep, or apologize, or any of the other things that a man in a new uniform cannot do in front of other men in new uniforms. That was a long time ago now. I have walked a great many miles since, and I have done a great many things, and I have made, by my own count, several dozen more mistakes, although none of them have walked me anywhere quite as far as that first one did. I think about my father often. I think about the joke he could not find, and about the 2 words he found instead, and about how the 2 words were better than any joke would have been, although neither of us knew it at the time. I think about Sergeant Boyle, and about the lie he told, and about how a man can save a life with a sentence that costs him nothing. I think about Tobias Hatch, who is, the last I heard, a school teacher in Terre Haute, married with a daughter. I think about my mother in the kitchen, sitting down without asking what thing I had done. And I think sometimes about doors, about how a man can spend his whole young life walking through them and assuming, because they have always opened in only one direction, that they always will. About how the door he doesn't notice is the one that closes behind him. My father was right about the mouth. He was right about it on the first day he told me, and he was right about it every day after, and he was right about it on the day it walked me into Sergeant Boyle's tent. What he could not have known, because I did not know it myself, was that the mouth was also the thing that would keep me, in the years that followed, more or less alive. The men I served with laughed at things I said. The laughing was, on certain nights, the only warm thing in a cold place. I set out to be a serious man, the way my father wanted. The funny one was what I became when the serious one ran out. My father would not have laughed at the jokes I learned to tell. He would have shaken his head. the way he always shook his head, and he would have said something about my mouth, and he would have meant it, and he would also secretly have been glad. I think he would have been glad. I think, on balance, that he would. If you enjoyed the story, Pollard appears again in my first novel, The Line Uncrossed, available Memorial Day weekend 2026, wherever books are sold. Or visit donmcdonald.com for a special early bird listener-only offer. Thanks for listening. I'm Don McDonald.
Do you keep hearing podcast ads, like this one, for example, but always wonder how you actually get involved with them for your own brand or organization? Well, it's easier than you think. We're Acast, and we give you the platform to do it all yourself. Browse thousands of popular podcasts, choose the shows that match your perfect audience, set your budget, and launch. And if you want a hand, our podcast specialists are there to help you launch with confidence. This is podcast advertising without barriers. Get started at acast.com/advertise.
Thanks for listening all the way to the end. You're officially a story finisher, and I appreciate that more than you know. If you're curious what else I'm up to, check out one of my other podcasts, New Tales Told. It's brand new, original short fiction written and narrated by me. Just search New Tales Told in this app. And thanks so much for listening to LitReading, now part of the Short Story Verses channel at shortstoryverses.com.